in the 19th century to the early decade of the 20th century. What is the main aim? Is to provide the survey of the kinds of writing, like major authors or the early arrival English language in India, and also the brief survey of the issues and the concerns in the writing in English. In this unit, you will have the structures like objectives, same introduction and early Indian prose and prose in 1850s and after, and so on. So you must be noted that very outset, the Indian writing in English, the only one among many forms that constitutes an Indian literature. That is, Indian writing in English coexists with literatures like Telugu, Kamiza, Bangla, and Assamese literatures. It is also important to know that Indian writing in English. See, early Indian prose. Dean Mohammed publishes the volume of his traveler, essentially a collection of letters about his life in the EIC. Early Indian and India, a manual on shampooing here. He was the official shampooing surgeon to the King of England. The first major Indian writer of English prose was Raja Ram Mohan Roy. He was the first major Indian writer. And also he is an excellent example of the 19th century attempts by Indian elites to observe the Western culture and English while retaining their natives' identities as well. And Raja Ram Mohan Roy also use of English in his prose writings did get him readers and supporters. Notably, people like Bentinck, who then treated Roy's comments as a starting point to make political decisions about India. Is my voice is audible?
Yes, ma'am, it is audible.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Ram Mohan Roy translated the Upanishads into Bangla and in English. And also Ram Mohan Roy works on religion such as the early A Defense of Hindu Theism and later. He prepared a manual of Bengali grammar in English. He also returned to the Vedas and Hindu text, the true nature of Sati in his Sati as a religious right. And his other significant writing in English includes a plea to Lord William Bentinck to abolish the Sati, tracts on Hindu property, laws, and the revenue system of India. His inspirational work would later on encourage more Indians to write essays in English. Prose, 1850s and after. So if we are to consider the forms of English writing during the 19th century, we first need to understand the places of publications and the immediate context of the narratives, like speeches at political and the social occasions that later appeared in print, biographies, autobiographies and memories, travelers, literary histories, economic histories, literary critical essays and writings, social and political commentaries, metaphysical essays, letters, lectures at formal gatherings, journalism. The topics of the speeches and the commentaries were on diverse issues like spiritualism, education, women and reform, nationalism, economics, social change, Indian history and culture. So it is possible that the Indian writers in English were more concerned with the commentaries because they saw their roles as the instruments of social change rather than the entertainers. Dadabhai Naoroji is the first Indian to be elected to the British Parliament, and he gave his first speech in the House of Commons in 1892. Rabindranath Tagore, like many others of the time, lectured in English and wrote numerous letters which are now available in print form. The Sadhana was the published version of his lectures on Indian philosophy delivered at Harvard. Today, his lectures on nationalism are still the subject of critical attention. Swami Vivekananda, known better for his speech before the Chicago Parliament of Religions in 1893 was a reformer who set up the Ramakrishna mission, who wrote and lectured extensively in India as well as the USA and Europe on the Vedas, rationality, and the universal tolerance. The lectures were later published. And Vivekananda was astute enough to see that Hinduism was not a flawless religion. However, in his Chicago address, he made it clear that its so-called barbarism was no unique. Who was the first Indian to be elected to the British Parliament? It was Mahatma Gandhi. Extensive writings for the newspaper has now been collected more in the form of short essays and commentaries. Gandhi's contribution to the periodicals Young India and Harijan are powerful pieces of criticism, demanding freedom, equality for all, and religious tolerance. Much of his later political philosophy can be found in the embryonic form in these writings. Topics and themes that have been the subject of Gandhi's analysis and commentary include. So all these are the topics you are having in the block 1 introduction. If you go to for the block 2, Indian poetry till independence. In this 4 units you have, those are Indian poetry and romantic tradition, 2 19th century poets, Henry Dorazio and the Tordat. Early 20th century poetry, Aurobindo. Early 20th century poetry, Sarojini Naidu. These are the topics which are in the block 2 and the block 3, the Indian novels. The Indian novels in the 1950s to 1980s. And the Indian women fiction. The post-modern Indian novel. The novel of the Indian diaspora, sorry. Next, Rohinton Mysteries, A Fine Balance. In block 4, Indian poetry and the drama, 1950s to 1990s. In this unit, you have Indian poetry and drama, 1950s to 1990s, modern Indian poetry, themes and techniques. Modern Indian poetry, Nissim Ezekiel, modern Indian poetry, A.K. Ramanujan, contemporary drama, Mahesh Dattani's Final Solutions, and Indian women poetry. These are the topics you have in the block 4. Total 20 units you have in this book, paper 9. If you already have read the textbooks, if you have any doubts regarding any questions or any topics, you can ask me as of now, or we'll go to early 20th century fiction. Or you think this is a first class, today you take the time, read the lessons, read the chapters, read the units, blocks, whichever doubt you have, you can ask me tomorrow as well. We have 8 classes and today is the first class. In the last class, I'll give you some tips how to write the exams and how the question paper pattern will be. So best thing I can give you is to read the textbook more and more, and you'll get the questions from these lessons only, and whatever the questions are given in back of the every unit, you will get the questions from the same. Prepare your own answers, then you will get to understand the topic and you will learn more. If you start thinking the answers for the questions, then you will understand the each and every topic. Then it go into your mind, then you can write your exam well. Any concerns? Okay, in this first block, unit 4, arc and RINs, the dark room is an important topic. So mark it as important. And the Rajarao's Kantapura also is an important topic. Just mark these 2 units as an important topics. Let's have a summary of Arkan Narayan's The Dark Room. Arkan Narayan was born in Chennai in 1906. Narayan spent part of his childhood under the care of his maternal grandmother, and studied at various schools in the city. Later, the family moved to the Mysore and Narayan graduated from Maharaja College. C. The Justice Graham Greene recommended the book of his publisher, and it was finally published in 1935. Narayan's next novel, The Bachelor of Arts, in 1937, was inspired in part by his experience at college. So, the English teacher in 1945. Malgudi Days was published in the November 1942, and Narayan started his own publishing company, Indian Thought Publication. Waiting for the Mahatma was based on the fictional visit to Malgudi by Mahatma Gandhi. In 1953, his works were published in the United States for the first time by Michigan State University Press and later by Viking Press. The guide was written while he was visiting the Indian States in 1956 on the Rockefeller Fellowship. The Dark Room was first published in English in 1938 and in India in 1956. So this is a story about a woman named Savitri is a mild woman whose husband Ramani is an insurance company employee. They have 3 children, Kamala, Sumati and Babu. Savitri works very hard and is a careful housewife. Ramani, however, treats her badly. He controls the finance, decides the menu for the day and is tyrannical towards all of them. Whenever she is badly treated, Savitri retires to a dark room in their house. She also discovers that Ramani is having an affair. One day, the humiliation and neglect become too much and Savitri leaves home. She is rescued by a poor man and his wife. Eventually, she comes back to her home. It is perhaps Narayan's most political novel because of its clear criticism of gender relations, and the family. While it might not be a feminist text in the truest sense, Narayan's criticism of gender and power relations indicate a version of early feminism. So this dark room has 2 crucial themes, but it's revolving around the women question. The first theme is for the nature of the Hindu family and which the woman's role is already decided for her. And the second theme connects to the first, however, suggests a possible individualism for the women. Here, the family and the gender roles. Narayan's main focus is the slow erosion of a woman individual identity within a family. In a sense, the novel is an attack on a myth of the ideal family by showing how the family is a space where gender roles are often decided by the men of the house. This is what we are facing in nowadays as well. The protagonist is a symbolically named Savitri after one of the most revered models of Indian womanhood. She does all that is expected of her and serves the family with utmost diligence. Despite this, she has no role to play in decision making. The cook is unhappy, but she cannot feed him. The child is ill, but she cannot tell him to stay at home. Narayan's criticism of the family section focuses on the following. The woman does not choose her roles. The roles are given to her as a mother, as a wife, as a sister, as a cook, etc., etc. The absence of any role for women in decision making. The woman is never given a role as a decision making. The complete erasure of her identity and personality due to the pressure of the roles assigned to her. So in the scene where Savitri leaves the house, she says, I don't possess anything in this world. What possession can a woman call her own except her body? Everything else she has in her father's, her husband's, or her son's. So what Savitri is saying is that her entire identity comes from somebody else. Like before marriage, her father, after marriage, her husband or the son. So she wants nothing. Even her identity is not her own. So when Savitri leaves the house, she leaves behind the bestowed identities. We are given 2 contrasting women characters here. Gangu, who left home when she pleased and went where she liked, moved about without an escort, stayed back at people and talked loudly. Another woman, Ponni, who has rescued Savitri when she tries to drown herself, gives her a piece of advice. Men are good creatures, but you must never give way to them. Be firm and they will behave. So Narayan's characterization of Gangu and Savitri is essentially a comment on the different ways in which women lose or gain their individualism. It is not in Savitri's case a search of her identity. The problem is that she has no say in the kind of identity that is given to her. A related example of gender's roles in Ramani's treatment of for the children. This is Ramani's angry comments to his son Babu, who asked you to go near the doll's business. Are you a girl? Later, he calls out that effeminate boy Eden. So gender roles are instilled in the children from the very early age. The father in the Narayan's novel seeks to allot behavior, recreation, and the attitude to the children so that they fit the gender roles for adult life. Thus, boys will not play with dolls become a kind of rule. This is a form of socialization where boys and girls are fitted, trained to fill certain gendered roles, even if they are unwilling to do so. The third example reveals how socialization is achieved. After Savitri disappears, when Babu asks his father about her, Ramani has a touch of anxiety. So Narayan's description of his attack is an illustration of the gender roles we are expected to play. While the strong man in him said that she couldn't have gone far and that she was bound to return when she regained sense. The weak man, so long unnoticed by himself, constantly pricked him. Here, Ramani has assimilated the idea of the strong man. Men, both fathers and husbands, must be strong because they are men. However, Narayan shows how this ideal is never fully achieved. Even strong men sometimes detect weakness in themselves. This is so because these are roles into which we try to fit. Even if we are not comfortable, the role is often at the expense of individualism. Individualism and the women. Here, there's a question given in the sample examination. Write a note on a way individualism for the women is erased in the novel and how she finds it temporarily. You'll find the answers in this unit 4.3, individualism and the women. See, the society's predetermined roles for girls and boys are played out within a family. As Ramani's behavior indicates, the social roles for gender are first developed as a form of behavior within the family. The family, in other words, reproduces gender roles. This novel makes a strong criticism for this condition where the family is seen as a fundamental unit for individual identity. This family functions in such a way that the man can choose his identity, but the woman is not given this choice. The family indoctrinates the children in gender roles so that they fit into such roles and for the society. See, mainly this literature part will be like how people think individually. Like if the topic is there, for example, the dark room, if we read this story, the dark room, whatever, whichever aspect you see the story, it may be from the men's side, women's side, it will be different. But the way which you understood or the way which you explore to the story will be maybe differ from person to person. That is literature. It will be maybe understand for in a one way for me and other ways to you it will be different. So you have to think in a different ways. Rajarau's Kantapura. Is a myth, story, and the language in Kantapura. Rajarao makes a use of a tradition mode of storytelling via myths. Thus, for example, he uses a time scale which is non-Western. How Krishna, when he was but a babe of 4, had begun to fight against demons and had killed the serpent Kali. So too our Mohandas began to fight against the enemies of our country. So here Rajarao merges the modern calendar time, what we can think of as a secular time, with myth time and the Hindu story of Krishna. It is important to understand the significance of this kind of merging. This Rajarao does it to reject the Western modes of writing history. Western histories are almost always linear. This happened and then this happened. Event. It leads to event to one event to second leads to third. So this history also shown as a cause and effect. This happened and therefore this happened. So this time scheme is rigidly maintained usually in most historical narratives. Rajarao rejects this scheme. Instead, he links Gandhiji's historical time in the present 1930s in India with the mythical past of the ancient Hindu epics. So Rajarao, however, understands that this is indeed how native cultures measure time, not in terms of clock, but in seasons, in myths and legends. So another example is the linkage of the anti-colonial struggle with the religious and the mythic history. Like Harishchandra, before he finished his woe, the gods will come down and dissolve his woe. And the Britishers will leave India and shall pay less taxes and there will no policemen. Once again, Rajarao explains the present in terms of mythic past. The relief from colonial domination is compared to the release of the ancient and the virtuous Hindu king from his woes. So the yoke of this woe, like the yoke of colonialism, can be shifted by being virtuous and when gods intervene. There are no historical explanations for the anti-colonial struggle, but the mythic ones serve the same purpose. This Rajarao's novel merges history with myth and thus creates an Indian way of narrating the story. The historical figure of Gandhi and the religious mythic figure of Krishna come together. The use of myth alongside factual history ensures that Kantapura has distinct flavor and does not resemble a Western novel at all. Character names in an Indian mode is a corner house Murthy, waterfall Venkatamma. Colloquial expressions and exclamations. Ayyo, ayyo. Storytelling, the form of grandmother's tale within which there are other stories and their narrators. Usages borrowed from Indian context, young boys, bright as banana trunks, and she, Kanchamma, the goddess. Killed a demon ages ago. A demon that had come to ask for our young sons as food and our young women as wives. Mannerisms and polite speech take only this much milk, just this much. Take it, bhattare, only 1 cup more, only one. The use of folk, local, and the ancient myths, histories, and stories. So what Rajarao does is use the Western form, the novel, and indigenize it by combining it with the Indian ways of storytelling. Convert the syntax of English so as to accommodate Indian idiomatic expression. Use the English language to narrate a local history rooted in the specific cultural milieu. Gandhi, Gandhism, and the moral economy of Kantapura. Nation and the nationalism in Kantapura. This is also one important topic. Nation and the nationalism in Kantapura. You can mark it as important thing. Gandhism, and the moral economy of Kantapura. Mostly Rajarau's novels showcase the Gandhism as a way of life and as a political weapon. This has several aspects. Like Murthy in the novel is influenced by Gandhiji's philosophy and wishes to spread it in Kantapura. The village was Gandhiji's focus throughout his life. He saw the village as free of corruption of the city. It was self-contained, the harmony with nature, and the close-knit community unlike the city. Self-transformation is the key to Swaraj, argued Gandhi. Murthy accepts this and realizes that his prejudice about caste and religion must first be erased. The novel deals with the difficulty of self-transformation. Venkama, for example, finds his insistence on equality difficult. Murthy's insistence on Gandhian philosophy therefore leads to a conflict within the village. Rajarao shows how social change is always contest between different ways of thinking. What is this Gandhi business? Nothing but wearing coarse handmade cloth, not fit for a mob, and blowing out bhajans and mixing with the parades. This emphasis on the ritual life, a life which will then lead to the social change, is only one aspect of the Gandhism theme in the novel. So what is important to see how Rajarao works out Gandhism as an economic and political principle. The model points out this shows the substitution of the colonial mode of exploitative economy with the native one. This native economy is moral, anti-colonial, and this Gandhism is a novel, is a powerful weapon because it is about the self-reliance and therefore not dependent upon colonial masters or their structures. It is moral and just because it serves the nation and the freedom struggle and not individuals. It does not, unlike the colonial economy, work on exploitation. Nation and the nationalism in Kantapura. You will get the question definitely from this topic. Nation and the nationalism in Kantapura. This is one of the most important striking features of the novel is its attempt to show how a small village can function as a metonym, means a part for a whole, or a metaphor standing in for a whole country. The village of Kantapura is a microcosm of the great changes and the events happening across the entire subcontinent in Rajarao's vision. Rao shows that nationalism and the national identity can work out our advantage. It unites various parts of the economy for the country. However, Rao also suggests that nationalism comes at a price. It asks us to ignore cultural difference in favor of a large pan-Indian identity through which some people and cultures will lose their distinctive identity. The very India of a nation is supposed on a unified and shared cultural heritage, geography and politics, that is nationalism, emerges as a unifying tendency where people from diverse backgrounds, languages, histories and cultures come together for a great cause. India as a concept, in other words, is a larger, more coherent vision that say a village or a group of cities. What this means is the differences of culture and languages must be ignored in favor of greater idea, the nation. The nation represents therefore an erasing of differences in favor of a single concept, idea and identity, Indian rather than Tamil, Bengali or the Assami, Indian rather than Hindu, Muslim or the Sikhs. So this process is often referred as the homogenization, where differences must be ignored and the people seek only one large identity, that is Indian. The quest for a single national identity is therefore a quest for erasing differences, homogenization under one label or umbrella identity. We see this process of homogenization at work in Kantapura as well. The Congress workers in the novel oppose all foreign ideas and goods in their espousal of Swadeshi, but the very idea of a single homogenized nation is a Europe model. In this model, all parts of the nation must be brought under one single idea and the identity. A nation is singular, never multiple in the European model. It will have a shared culture and a common language. Thus, in Rajarao's novel, even in this sleepy village, Hindi begins to acquire the role of the dominant language. Sankaru insists on speaking Hindi even to his mother and more or less ignores the local language, Kannada. He also resists English, where the narrator visualizes Murthy, who has been arrested. He is visualized as wearing kurta pajama, the standard northern Indian costume. Instead of the Kannada dress, the dhoti. The Hindi teacher, Surya Menon, is not a North Indian but Malayali. Everybody seems, in other words, to opt for a commonality of dress and language because it is more important to be an Indian rather than a Kannadiga or a Malayali. So even the story of the village, as we have already seen, can be narrated only through a reference to larger epic stories of Krishna and Harishchandra. Unless one makes use of these pan-regional, that is across regions, myths and stories. It appears one cannot narrate even a local story. This itself is a homogenization. There are national epics and stories which must be used as we are to tell our own isolated stories. The price of nationalism and the national identity, Rao shows, is usually the loss of one's local identity and culture. Whether this is desirable or not, he leaves us to decide. There are other aspects of nationalism that comes to the fore in the novel. When Murthy takes to Gandhiism, he begins to campaign for two things. But one is the national identity, abolishing the caste system. The new India, he suggests, can evolve around when traditional social systems like the caste system are abolished, but he meets the resistance from the villages. While they see the new India free of British rule as desirable, they are unwilling to let go of the structures they have lived with us for. However, once age-old prejudices, it's not easy. Venkama abuses him for trying to dismantle the caste system. Even Murthy himself is unsure of his beliefs. Thus, after visiting the houses of the untouchables, he takes a purif purificatory bath. He also takes a little Ganga water. And Rao suggests that nationalism and national beliefs cannot always erase the deep-seated prejudices. Thus, Murthy, who hopes to be radical, retains a certain amount of Brahminical beliefs. In similar fashion, all the rituals in the Indian novel are Hindus and the upper caste, the aarti, the pujas, conches, bells, bhajanas, not to mention Vedantic beliefs. When national movements takes place in Kantapura, these make use of Hindu upper caste rituals and beliefs. That is, there are no non-Hindu or non-upper caste rituals that can be treated as nationalist. In other words, the upper caste Hindu rituals and beliefs become or are treated as Indian or nationalist beliefs by ignoring other forms. This is another mode of homogenization where the beliefs of non-Hindus and non-upper caste are slighted when speaking of nationalism. So Kantapura is important novel because it shows how Indian writers negotiated the problem of a foreign language and used it to tell their Indian story. So this Kantapura is a story of the villages transformation during the freedom struggle. It's a local story, but has larger issues and questions in it. It combines myth and also local history with a specific form of Indianized English to narrate this story. It shows how a local history can be narrated through the use of folklore, but also through the use of ancient and the shared histories. In this, it rejects the Western modes of storytelling. Its main theme of Gandhism and the Gandhian philosophy revolves around economic questions. Rao shows how Gandhian transformation is not easy to achieve because older prejudices are different to erase. A native economy is a moral one, shows Rao. The theme of nationalism is dealt with such a way that Rao shows us both sides of the picture. On the one hand, he shows all parts of India, even smaller places like Kantapura, following a single national goal, that is independence. On the other hand, he shows how such a single goal and a very idea of nation sometimes ignores and erases very local conditions and cultural differences. So how does Rajarao reveals the advantages and disadvantages of nationalism? This is one important question of this topic, chapter or the unit. In block 1, if you have any concerns regarding block 1 or from unit 1 to 5, you can ask me. Any concerns regarding block 1 introduction from unit 1 to 5? As much you read the textbook, that much concerns you will get. Read each and every unit, then try to answer the questions which has given in the sample examination questions, and try to answer yourself by finding the answers from the textbook so that you will understand the topic very well. Any concerns as of now from block 1, unit 1 to 5? We will go for the block 2. That is Indian poetry till independence. In this unit 6, Indian poetry and the romantic tradition, poetry and the social change in Derozio and the Shelley, nature and the romanticism in Derozio and Dutt, Torudutt. This is so poetry and the social change in Derozio and the Shelley, and the nature and the romanticism in Derozio and Dutt. Okay. Shelley's Ode to the West. In this unit introduces to the earliest Indian poets in English. Their writing during the British colonial period. These poets were one of the first to be educated in the English language and to imbibe English literary styles. This unit shows the links between these poets and their English predecessors and the counterparts. Indians had begun writing prose in the last decades of the 18th century. Throughout the 19th century, we see a number of Indian writing letters, memories, treatises in the English language, but poetry appears late on the scene. We see the first set of poems appearing in an anthology of poetry published in 1840. David Richardson's selections from the British poets from the time of Chaucer to the present day. We see the first set of poems appearing in the anthology of poetry published in 1840. David Richardson's selections from the British poets from the time of Chaucer to the present day. The volume included English poets writing on India, but also for the first time, poetry by Indians. Kashi Prasad Ghosh and Henry Derozio, Ghosh and Derozio therefore represent the official presence of native poets in the English literary canon. Poetry and the social change. Derozio was of the Indo-Portuguese descent and the radical. He inspired a group of youth and founded the Young Bengal movement, an admirer of Western education and the values. Derozio was, however, also a nationalist, and his better-known poems, The Harp of India and To My Native Land, reveals this stance. Like Derozio Ghosh also chose Indian subjects for his poetry. Michael Madhusudan Dutt is better known for his Bengali poetry than his English one. But he did try his hand at the narrative poems titled The Captive Ladies. Derozio's The Harp of India in 1827 recalls the P.B. Shelley's famous Ode to the West Wind. In both cases, the poet functions as a prophet. In Derozio's case, the poet as a prophet is one who serves a national cause. Shelley's poet speaker seeks a role where his voice would scatter over all mankind. Derozio writes, of flowers still blooming on the minstrel's grave, those hands are cold, but if the notes divine, maybe by mortal weekends, once again, harp of my country, let me strike the strain. The same with the Shelley's poem. In Derozio's poem, he calls upon himself and seeks the permission of the muses to strike the strain. The country itself is a harp. In Shelley's poem, the poet hopes to be the strain but awakens the earth. Both clearly see poetry as an agent of social change and the political transformation. Both wish for poetry to reach far and wide. So the key differences is that Shelley hopes that he becomes one with nature so that his voice spreads over the world, but Derozio's speaker has little interest outside the subcontinent. Here, music, arts, and the poet are treated as aspects of the contemporary condition. Colonialism, Derozio sees the function of art as social, not aesthetic alone. That is, like Shelley, Derozio sees the role of poetry as not just aesthetic or but truth and beauty in English romantic sense of the term. Rather, he sees it as social and political. It is indeed important to see how Derozio uses romantic images, especially for the poet as prophet, for social and political effect. Neither of these two poets see poetry or art as an end in itself instead. So thus, Derozio's romanticism works at two levels. To see poetry as a means of instilling certain social and political values, to show how the context produces or demands certain kinds of arts. Nature and the romanticism in Derosio, and that Torudat has remained, along with the Derosio, a popular figure for students and readers for early Indian poetry in English. And like Derosio, she used Indian subjects, especially myth and history, for her poetry in English. Both the major Indian poets of the 19th century, Derosio and the Torudat, were influenced by English poetry, especially the Romantics and the Neoclassical. In this section, we shall look at some of the Romantic influences. The influence is visible in significant ways, where the nature plays a dominant role in both the poets. There is an insistence on linking emotional states of human beings with natural conditions, such as seasons, bird songs, the time of the day, and the botanical settings. The romanticism of that is more on the lines of Williams Cooper rather than William Wordsworth. It is far more placid than Shelley's poetry. Fading lights, pale sunshine, pastel shades are common to both poets rather than the turbulent colors of the seasons. Thus, romanticism treats nature in the following ways, like as a means of nostalgia, as a connection to childhood, growth, and life itself, as an excuse to record emotions, that is, emotional responses of the speaker or the poet, or as a space of the quiet reflection. Memory, which functions as nostalgia, longing, and recollections in tranquility, as Wordsworth famously put it, also works through the early Indian poets. Derosio, in the romantic poet William Cooper's Yardley Oak, the poet like that sees an entire life story as connected to the story of the tree. Cooper's poem opens the survivor soul and hardly search of all that once lived here, thy brethren as my birth, since which I number threescore winters past. Similarly, that locates her individual memories in the aging tree, like the romantics who saw their lives as an intertwined with nature, that sees the casuarina tree as being more than just a tree. It is an indelible feature of her life itself. What the poem does it to show how human nature, life, and memory are abandoned in nature. That's nature poem depict a quiet arcane world where everything is in its place. Nature, nature in such poems is not fairy, one of the Shelleys. Rather, it is the quiet one of the Cooper and the English pastoral landscape. Variety, according to the English aesthetic heuristic of the Romantic age, was a secret of beauty and would therefore be of ordered variety. In Duck's Garden, she underscored the fact that it is not a sea of dull, unvaried green. Instead, there is variety, sharp contrasts of all colors here are seen. And later, palms arise like pillars, gray between. Thus, we get a picturesque scene where colors and plants are in contrast but ordered. That uses a variety of plants, colors, green in two shades, red, white, silver are the dominant colors in the poem. The entire poem is about the ordering of beauty, where an ordered nature is far more beautiful than an unruly wild jungle. Such an ordered garden thus suggests invokes a primal or a primitive nature. The poem ends thus: one might swoon, drunken with beauty, then or a days gaze on a primeval Eden in amaze. So it is important to note that the garden is not the space of action or anything dynamic like Keats' famous Ode to Autumn, where everything is sleepy, even the farmer is asleep beside the cedar tress. Instead, it is the space of swooning or quiet gazing. So nature in Dutt's version is the romanticism in is not the scene of conflict and stress as it is in the some romantic poets like Blake, Coleridge, and Shelley. Instead, nature is the space of quiet repose as the Wordsworth, Cooper, and the Keats. Her romanticism is one of the deep reflection aided by nature rather than the dynamism inspired by nature. She does not, unlike Shelley's poet in Ode to the West Wind, seek to be one with nature's powerful winds to blow across the earth. Rather, she wishes to observe nature's minute details, gaze and wonder at them. So this Eunice has suggested that the early Indian poets in English, Henry, Derezio, and the Torudat, can be compared to the English Romantic poets. It showed how Derezio poems of nationalism and social change also. Shelley's famous Ode to the West Wind. The poet in both poems wishes to be like a prophet and the musician whose thoughts and ideas will awaken a nation. In other poems, Derozio shows human responses to nature. In Torudat's poetry, we see a quiet romanticism where nature is an ideal place for reflection and thought. It helps the speaker recollect the childhood but also reflect on life itself. The two 19th century poets, Henry Thoreau and the Torudat. Nationalism and the poetry in the Thoreau's writings. So this unit introduced to the most significant early Indian poets in English, that is Henry Thoreau and the Torudat. So Derozio is significant not merely for the precision of his verse, but for being arguably the first Indian poet to compose a nationalistic poetry in the English language. We shall look at the nationalism in his famous poems, The Harp of India, To My Native Land, and to the Pupils of Hindu College, with references to other poems as well. In The Harp of India, Derozio makes the use of very English image, the rune. Silence had boundary with her fatal change, neglected, nude, and desolate art thou, like ruined monument on desert plain. The chain image is a double of the strings on the harp. The strings on the harp generate music when struck. So Derozio shows the chain as a kind of string too, but one with silences rather than voices. The rune in the silent harp is empty now, but it represents a potential music. So what Derozio suggests is an interesting meaning of the runed harp. This entirely up to the Indians, here referred to as a mortals, to reawaken the harp. The harp by itself does not generate music. The poem can be read as an allegory where the surface meaning is something but is actually saying something else for the national spirit. it is the Indians' responsibility to bring using the rude harp. What he is saying is simply the music of the harp is possible when we Indians awaken to the potential of the instrument. The allegory also functions at a different level. The potential of country is in the hands of its people. We can make something of this potential or let it go to ruin. The ruin, therefore, must not be read only as the emptiness, but emptiness that is potential waiting to wake, happen, and occur. We see a similar process at work in Derosius to my native land. The poem opens with the glory past of the country. In the Harp of India, Derosius spoke of the harp which is chained into my native land, he writes. Here too, freedom and the music have been changed. Derosius seeks to become the person who would dive into the past and revive images and memories of the glorious past. In this poem, again, Derosio does not see the past as being dead. Instead, he hopes to bring back the past in order to energize the present. The revival of consciousness is central to Derosio, as we can see from the above poems. In A Walk by Moonlight, the speaker of the poem is made aware of happiness and life on his walk. To the pupils of Hindu College, Derosio hopes to be the instrument that will raise the students' consciousness. The entire poem is imaged in the form of nature, blossoming and the ripening, expanding like the petals of the young flowers. Your intellectual energies and powers that stretch like young birds in soft summer hours, their wings. Then the speaker in the poem has hopes for the future. He also hopes that students will make him their teachers famous. I see fame in the mirror of futurity, like Shelley in Ode to the West Wind. The radio speaker also hopes to serve as a prophet voice, a voice that will influence the minds and the future generations. If that were to happen, says the speaker, then I feel I have not lived in vain. It is possible to read the poem as being about the role of a poet and a teacher. Teresio shows that how a poetic voice speaks certain truths and offers to the students and listeners early knowledge and the new perceptions. This is the task of the poet. Once the students and the youth acquire this early knowledge and the new perceptions, they will become something else entirely. So this poem might have an autobiographical reference. It might have to do with the political consciousness among the students of Hindu college where Erosio taught. However, this Erosio is not blinded by his nationalism. He recognizes the problem of the Indian cultures and the society and is not averse to making critical comments but about this. Thus, in the head note to his poem, The Eclipse, he argues the Indian have to abandon their superstitions if they want to acquire modernity, he writes. When he eclipse is predicted, the Hindus, men, women, and children betake themselves to the riverside and stand in expectation of the event, ready to plunge into the water with prayers to call all the gods at once that the moon may not be swallowed up by a monster who they supposed comes for that purpose. This is a belief of the multitude, but the Brahmins know full well how eclipses are caused, and they can calculate them with the precision of the best European astronomers. Derozio here reinstates the hierarchy of knowledge. The masses are ignorant and the foolish, but the Brahmins know better. By comparing Brahmins with Europeans, Derozio is suggesting a social hierarchy as well, showing how Brahmins are as good as the Europeans. We see such a criticism of Hinduism in the Fakir of Jangira as well. The Fakir of Jangira is a narrative poem set in Bhagalpur region and abounds in nature descriptions. The poem is a story of Sati and how a mendicant saves his former beloved Nulini from perishing, but Nulini's father, with the help of the Mughal prince, hunts down the fakir and kills him. While Derozio focuses on the tragic love story of the fakir and the Nulini. There are passages that are critical of the Hindu rituals. Thus, when Niluni is on the pair and the flames climb high and the Brahmin men and women sing about the rewards and joys that await the woman who dies as a sati. But Derozio suggests that all the price of the promised tomorrow is a false. The woman who is about to die does not believe in any of it. So he writes, Nulini eyes is not upon the dead, to one after parting, thoughts have fled. Nulini hopes to be rescued. She does not hope for the great joys of heaven. She just does not want to die. Henry Derozio offers a criticism of the ritual. The widow is not keen on dying, nor dies. She believes in joys of heaven promised in the Brahmin song. She wants to live on and hopes that her former beloved, the fakir, will come to rescue her. Despite being a nationalist, Derozio does not glorify the Indian past or culture. He is nationalist, but also critical of the injustices of Indian society. So, Torudat between the East and the West. Her first volume, A Chef Glen in French Fields, included some pieces by her elder sister and some translations from the French. The volume was fairly well received. She later learned Sanskrit so as to get back to her Indian roots. She had set about working on Indian volume corresponding to the earlier one. A chef gathered in Sanskrit fields. When she was diagnosed with tuberculosis, that is the disease that had taken away her sister and would then kill her brother as well. She never quite finished the volume, dying at the age of 21. The second edition of the first volume appeared in 1878 and the third soon after. The volume Chef Gathered in Sanskrit Fields appeared in 1882 with an introduction by Edmund Gosse, who had been impressed by the 1875 work. Torudat's unfinished novel, Mayanka, was later published in serial form in Bengali, Bengal magazine in 1878. She also published Ancient Ballads and Legends of Hindustan. At the time of her death, she left an unfinished novel, Bayanka, in 2006. Chandani Locuse put together her collected prose and poetry. Ancient Ballads and Legends of Hindustan consists of New versions of Hindu tales in English. The first section contains 9 poems. Section 2 has 7 poems. There are tensions between the Hinduism and the Christianity. In Dutt's upbringing, this along with her multiple locations, India, France, England, leaves Dutt somewhere in between the cultures. She was unacceptable to her conservative Hindu family and remains an ancient woman in England. In this section, I explored the multiplicity of locations in her work. Dutt wrote in French and English clearly, distancing herself from the Bangla and the Hindu traditions. However, her translations of ancient Hindu texts Mahabharata, Vishnu Purana, Ramayana, and Bhagavad Gita meant to return to her roots, albeit through the English. The very fact that she wrote in multiple languages and translated across cultures indicates the multiplicity of locations. Okay. That's our Kazarina tree, or even in her detailed accounts of Hinduism, are modes of exorcising India. She presents the story of the Lakshman Rekha on the Lakshman and that of iconic Hindu wife in Savitri. This is an attempt to make India appealing to her Western audience. Indian writers, especially those brought up in Hindu families, would be familiar with many of the legends she recounts in ancient ballads, but what that seeks is a Western audience unfamiliar with these traditions. Hence, the exotic appeal of many of these non-Christian traditions must be carefully cultivated. But that goes beyond exoticizing. She offers also a careful evaluation of these traditions. Her famous Savitri in ancient ballads revisits one of the best known stories of the Hinduism. The story of a wife's loyalty towards the husband. The poem reveals according to the Alpna Sharma, Dutt's position as neither purely English nor solely Indian in 2003. That emphasizes those features of the tale and have hitherto been neglected in favor of the religiosity and the royalty angle. That, for instance, draws attention to the women freedom of movement in the poem, a feature that was not available to the 19th century women in India. That also emphasizes the Savitri's individuality and the right to self-determination. She will choose her path and goal. She even chooses her own husband. The return of the translation is, I suggest, an attempt of reclaim a different identity that does not seek to be truly Indian because she sees flaws and shortcomings in it. After her exposure to the Western cultures in England and France, on the other hand, she is unwilling to abandon her ancient identity wholesale either. The Dutt family's conversion to Christianity alienated them from the rest of their conservative relatives. They were not invited to festivals and occasions like marriages. Some of Dutt's poetry reveals her discomfort with Hinduism. For example, the royal ascetic and the Hind, a tale from the Vishnu Purana that describes a king who gives up his throne and the power to lead the life of a hermit. However, he finds himself unable to attain the spirit of true detachment when he begins care for a fawn. After narrating his life, that comments true detachment when he begins care for a fawn. After narrating his life, that comments God is love and not to be adored by a devotion born of stoic pride or with aesthetic rights or the finance heart, but with a love in character akin to his unselfish, all-including love, and therefore little can be sympathize with what the Brahman sage would fain imply as a concluding moral of this tale, that for the hermit king it was a sin to love his nursling. What a sin to love. This is a sharp criticism of the very idea of renunciation. It's a privilege to see God as love rather than as one who we reach through the finance and fear. Suggested that it is possible, of course, that such a response comes from her own sides in religious beliefs. This suggests that was located somewhere between Christian European culture and the Hindu Indian one. Her criticism of Hinduism, especially its gender inequalities, stemmed from the encounter with assimilation of the Christian European culture. Yet her return to Sanskrit and ancient India suggests a reluctance to abandon it wholesale, either exposed to a new modernity with its emphasis on gender equality and the social change. So that re-evaluates Hinduism from this perspective and thereby locates herself beyond and between the two cultures. So in this unit, we have looked at two major early poets in English, that is Henry Thoreau and the Thorudat. Thoreau was discussed as a nationalistic poet, but we also noted that despite his nationalism, he is critical of Indian society's flaws as well. Thorudat was examined as a poet caught between the caste and the east and the west. She exoticizes India but is critical of it. She adopts the Western modes but returns to her native traditions. Early 20th century poetry, Aurobindo. Spirituality and the transformation, symbolism and the mysticism in Aurobindo, and the famous Savitri. So in this unit, studies of the poetry of Aurobindo Ghosh was more popularly known as the Aurobindo. The life divine essays on the Gita and the human cycle, Aurobindo believed that the human beings would evolve into something higher through a transformation of the psychic being, his very spirit, and final a complete transformation of mental, emotional, and physical and spiritual aspects of the human. A learned commentator on Hinduism and philosophy. Aurobindo's works in prose and poetry and some plays have contributed to the domain, not only in literature, but also the philosophy and the history of ideas. Aurobindo's poetry explored the experience of the divine, human consciousness, and the spirituality. His epic Savitri was based on the story of Satyavan and Savitri from the Mahabharata, but was essentially a poem about the transformation of the self into a higher order of being. Several of his other poems are similarly about the transformation of the self. Spirituality and the transformation, and the symbolism and the mysticism in Aurobindo, and the story about Savitri. So you'll get the important questions of what are the main themes in the Aurobindo's Savitri. Aurobindo in his epic poem, it has 12 books, 48 cantons, and the 23 to 23,000 lines take the story of Satyavan and the Savitri and uses it to speak about the divinity and the humanity's quest for perfection and spiritual bliss. Savitri is a poem about the battle of spirit against the forces of morality, the manifestation and the divine spirit within the human, the power of transform and the transcend human boundaries and the limitations. Full of mystic imagery and the complex symbolism, Aurobindo Savitri is an epic of human transformation, of the quest of immorality and the enlightenment. What Aurobindo himself wrote as a note to the poem is worth quoting. The tale of Satyavan and the Savitri is recited in the Mahabharata as a story of conjugal love conquering death. But this legend is, as shown by many features of the human tale, one of the many symbolic myths of the Vedic cycle. Satyavan is a soul carrying the divine truth of being within itself, but descending into the grip of death and ignorance. Savitri is a divine word, daughter of the sun, goddess of the supreme truth, who comes down and is born to save. Aswapati, the lord of the horse, truth, who comes down and is born to save. Aswapati, the lord of the horse, her human father is the lord of tapasya, the concentrated energy of the spiritual endeavor that help us to raise from the mortal to the immortal planes. Lord of the shining horse, father of Satyavan, is a divine mind here, fallen blind, losing its celestial kingdom of vision, and through that loss its kingdom of glory. Still, this is not a mere allegory. The characters are not personified qualities, but incarnations or the emanations of living and the consciousness forces with whom we can enter into concrete touch and take human bodies in order to help man and show him the way from his moral state to a divine consciousness and the immortal life. What Aurobindo suggests is throughout this poem is a need of transcend desire, the material and the body in the quest for spiritual peace. The way from his mortal state to the divine consciousness and the immortal life is Aurobindo's abiding theme. Both here and in his other poems, Savitri therefore is a divine world, and she her divine origins are clearly underlined. The theme of the birth and the quest inaugurated in book 4 of the epic suggests that every birth has a comic significance. The birth is a embodiment of what was thus far hidden away in the cosmos. That is, cosmic forces and powers acquire a shape and form in the body of the newborn. Savitri becomes an embodied form of the divine spirit in Aurobindo's poem. Therefore, when she faces Narad, who has just revealed that Satyavan is fated to die in a year's time, Savitri is not daunted. Practical considerations and the idea of the mortality do not deter here. This is against all accepted worldly truth, but this is preciously what Aurobindo wants us to see, that there are truths beyond the material world. Savitri is determined to ensure the survival of her spirit, and the body cannot be a limiting factor. Srinivasa Iyengar argues that the Savitri is cast for a uniquely cosmic role of struggle and the redemption. It's the end of the unit 8. From unit 1 to 8, just go through it. The dark shoes. Okay. So tomorrow will be our next class at 11:45. So just go through the textbook unit wise and block wise. If you have any doubts, just note it down. Any answers to the questions or any concerns, you can come up with tomorrow with your concerns. Just go through the textbook. Try to answer yourself the questions which are given for the sample examination questions. If you have any doubts, any concerns till now, you can ask. Once go for the unit 1 to unit 7, just go for it. Read, and if you have any concerns or the doubts, you can ask regarding anything. Try to read textbook more and more. Tomorrow also I'm going to give some important topics related in every unit. Okay. Whichever topic is completed today, so try to read the topic. If you have any concerns, you can come up tomorrow. Okay. Thank you for the time. Have a great day.